I went to the hospital, and at that time I wasn't diagnosed with anything. So, all they can do is ask questions and stuff, and it's a hard thing because you're trying to like answer. People are asking you things like they're asking you like, "Yo, so do you hear voices?" or "So do you?" And it's like, what if I say yes?
I wasn't going to cut myself, but had the knife to my wrist, and I kind of thought about my mom coming home because she would be the first one home, and I wouldn't be there, so she would just wonder where I was, and then she would like see the bloody knife like on the kitchen counter, blood everywhere, and I would not be there because I always imagined myself calling the ambulance, and I could just tell like how much that would freak her out, so decided not to do that. So that was the first of my coping strategies that I developed. And I developed a lot of different ones, like writing poems or just listening to songs or going on walks or co-ruminating, like talking to other people about it and all that kind of stuff. And it got to the point where I was continuously having suicidal thoughts, but it became more of a dull throb in the back of my head instead of like something that was distracting me. And so I just had this constantly for a couple of years. And I just assumed that everyone had it because I couldn't really remember a time when I didn't. So anyway, like 5 weeks into therapy, all my suicidal thoughts gone. Just like dropped off. It wasn't any gradual dissipation or whatever. It was just one day they're there and the next they're not. And while that might seem like a really good thing to most people, for me it was terrifying because those thoughts became part of my identity. So I was going to this like crazy like emotional depression suicide roller coaster where I would talk to therapists while I'm in school and be all good, and then I get out of school and I'm down in the dumps. And I ended up eventually, I got bad enough to where a psychiatrist wanted to give me pills. And there was one time where I wasn't taking pills for like 4 days in a row. And on the 5th day, I sat there and I was like, well, I was told I would not die if I overdose. So let's do an experiment. So I'm going to take 5 of these. I'm going to see where it goes. And I'm going to just say that I'm trying to catch up or whatever. But my body ended up rejecting it couple hours later, so puked it all out, and I was like, all right, obviously that's not good for me, but I felt awesome for the time being, so that's cool. So I won't do that again. And later in the quarter, I just got a refill on these pills. I had 35 to 36 in total. Talked to one of my suite mates when I got back and just did the whole like stereotypical script thing, like, hey, how's it going, how's your day, whatever. And then I went to my room and I took 35 pills. And I don't think of it as like a suicide attempt. Yeah, after that I became a little bit more normal in terms of depression and suicide, or suicidality, in which I had suicidal thoughts like once every month or 2 months or something like that, and wasn't feeling like depressed really that much. In terms of now, like I've already figured out that stress in general is my trigger. So if I get super stressed out, I get kind of depressed, and that happens mainly with big changes. But this is actually the reason why my major is in psychology. I did this whole overdosing thing. Before the overdose, I was a computer science major. Found out that computer science is not my thing, and got into psychology because I wanted to help people who are like me.
Depression is something that runs in my family on my dad's side. So my dad has it, and I assume other people before him. Um, and it was something that, I mean, nobody wants it, and obviously I didn't want to accept the fact that maybe I had depression as I started becoming older, like as a teenager and stuff. I've been on medication on and off a few times. I'm not usually somebody that likes to take medication just in general, and I just don't like the idea of having to almost feel like I need assistance, I guess. So it was definitely a process of coming to terms with the fact that I do have depression. I think when you get to the point where you can come to terms with it and you can accept the fact that there's absolutely nothing wrong with having depression, and just the fact that actually so many people deal with it, but it's just not something that's talked about, and you can feel okay with getting yourself the help you need, whether it be therapy and or medication. I think that's like a milestone in a sense, a personal milestone. So I guess what I would say to anybody that's struggling right now with depression and is hesitant to go to therapy or go on medication because they feel like they're above that, like they don't need that, somehow that makes them seem weak or like just inferior in some way, but that's not at all the case, and it's important to get the help because you can live so much happier. When you're depressed, you don't necessarily see through a clear lens, and when you start getting the help you need, you realize, looking back, like for me, it was something like, why didn't I go on medication sooner? Why did I fight it for so long? And now I'm at the point where it's like, oh, yeah, I take antidepressants, so what? It's not a big deal. But I think something that I worried about was my future. If I started to take medication now, just everything, like from jobs to how it would look, like what kind of light it would shine on me that I have to take antidepressants or something. And not even necessarily that's not something that people that are hiring ask, or but just even anybody, friends or any sort of relationship. But the truth is if you're not happy now, what's the point of looking towards the future?
Having suffered through depression and anxiety, and it having been an issue in my whole life, I very much believe in the spreading the word about the truth of mental health. My parents are Holocaust survivors. My mother went through many different camps, and the worst ones, Auschwitz, Medinich, and she was in the labor camp that's depicted in Schindler's List, Plaszow, and she's told me how she remembers the person who was in charge, Ralph Fiennes. My father was basically underground. He was basically running and hiding throughout Poland. He was shot by the Germans and left for dead, and found by the Russians, and ended up spending the rest of the war in a Russian army camp, having his right arm amputated. With regards to the mental health issues and how the Holocaust affected me and the rest of us, second generation as we would call, my sister had already taken piano and ballet. And so I remember sitting in the kitchen, he was sitting over here, and I was standing right in front of him. And he asked me whether I wanted to take ballet or piano. And I knew at 4 years old that he wanted me to take piano. I wanted to take ballet, but I said I want to take piano. My parents' desires for me were very, very strong. And looking back now that I've learned a lot, it had to do with them, that they wanted me to do well so they could have a strong sense of self-esteem. There are a few general things that the second generation ended up having difficulty. One was we could never make them suffer. And their attitude, mostly unspoken, was your suffering is nowhere close to mine. So we attempted to be perfect. We attempted to do really well at what we did. And when we didn't, we were just devastated. I had a major depression a year ago in the fall. I actually took medical leave from DU. And 3 times was the charm. I finally got it. And have a wonderful psychiatrist. And I'm on medication. I'm diagnosed as bipolar 2. Did some serious work, last year, and continue to do so. And I no longer go overboard. I take care of myself. I'm willing to express my feelings, to be honest. We're very secretive, very secretive. I used to never say no, at the detriment of my well-being. I really wasn't my own person, and so felt like there was a hole in my soul, and I was trying to fill it up by other people's. Wanted everybody to like me, and so I really wasn't me. I was a projection of everybody's desires of me. And when I was worried about, what people would say, my husband would say, they're more concerned about their lives, And there were a few people, friends, who weren't that way. And, well, they're no longer friends.
Well, when we really think about mental illness, we don't really go on to the, abstract. Usually it's clinically defined, schizophrenia and stuff like that. So then I found out that my cousin was doing crystal meth for 8 years. So she went to the hospital, she went to rehab, she tried to get out. She was withdrawing, she was relapsing, so she wanted anything. She wanted nicotine. We didn't really talk about it as a family. It was just there. It wasn't a problem because we wanted her to get help. But my traditional Armenian parents, you don't really talk about your issues as much. So it was just not something to deal with, but something that was there that we needed to help with. But yeah. So then she went through treatment. She quit cold turkey. Sometimes when we visit her at home, you can smell alcohol in her breath. So that really gets to you too, because she fought something so big that had such a big impact on her life and everybody else's lives. And now she's gotten into that, and then she really wants to keep it a secret. It just I know, and my sister knows because you smell it on her breath, but she just doesn't want to share that part of her life with anybody, with her parents. But everyone's really accepting. Everyone besides the children went and visited her at the hospital, checked up on her and everything. Everyone was always by her side through visiting hours, through everything. There was at least someone there, uncle, aunt, whatever, anybody. And we were really concerned, like me and my sister were really concerned with her and her well-being. And we have like alcoholics in the family too. So then I feel like that's kind of like DUIs, everything is like in like our immediate family. So then, and they don't, like I said, they don't like to get, they don't like to reach out and get help. But I feel like if they did, it would benefit their lives so much more.
So I've been having issues with depression and anxiety since I was a kid. Probably about second and third grade is when I had physical manifestations. Psychosomatic illness, I remember Dr. Colvin explaining that. Then I was suicidal in middle school, ulcers and substance abuse in high school, and then it just this sort of constant cycle. But there was always an external reason. You could definitely say I did not have a happy and stable childhood. So I was always able to point to something outside, all of the things in the world that were causing me to feel the way I did. And that continued, but I was always able to hold things together pretty well. And then I wouldn't for a while. And then I'd get it back together, you know. So when I finally realized that it wasn't all external, that there was something that I might be able to do differently, it was actually after I took the job at DU. And I'd moved out here. And by every objective measure, I had a great life. You know, good job, fantastic husband, a wonderful daughter, everything should have been great. But it wasn't, because I was miserable. Or I just didn't feel anything. And so I hit a point where I finally was like, well, I have insurance. That's nice. And clearly there's something going on beyond what's happening in the world that's making me feel this way. And then I finally decided to go to the doctor. It's hard to talk about this part because I had hit a couple of patches where I just couldn't get out of bed for days. And then finally one morning, my daughter, who was 3 at the time, came in and was like, Mommy, don't be sick today, because I want to play with you, and I couldn't. So that's when I finally said, okay, that's it. This has got to end. And so I went to see my doctor and finally got medicated and finally started cognitive therapy. And I've been doing those things ever since. And it has made life a lot better. You know, speaking of the stigma attached, it's always a lot easier for me to let people know when physical problems have gotten in the way. In part because I think in some ways I can't hide those. Whenever it gets so bad that I can barely walk, people can tell that. But I work pretty hard to not let the depression and anxiety show, especially at work. I, put on what I call my happy and competent face and suck it up, and get here. Granted, some days that means that I get here in sweats and no makeup, but I get here and try to get my work done and try not to let that affect it as much as I can. It can be a challenge. I think one of the things that's hard for an academic, especially with this condition, or for, well, I guess any overachiever, is that overall I have been fairly successful. I do, I keep things together. I do good work when I do. But I spend a lot of time frustrated because I think of how much more I could accomplish if I wasn't always battling this. If it weren't always the pressure, if it weren't always the physical pain, something where I end up spending more time than I would like in what I call survival mode, where it's sort of get through the day and then crash. And I think that if I didn't have these issues, I would just think, wow, I could accomplish so much more. And it's hard sometimes, especially when you're in a low and you've got colleagues who are publishing articles and running marathons. And I'm like, well, I got out of bed today, so there,
A little background about my family is that we've struggled with mental illness. My sister is bipolar and she's in her mid-30s. I have a sister who has MS, and I myself suffer from depression. I grew up in this area of just like mental stigma. We all had something not wrong with us, but I felt that it was like something wrong with us, and always dealing with them going in and out of rehab or trying to commit suicide. And it's hard watching your sisters go through that. And my parents are very old school. We'll just say that they do not believe that mental illness should be talked about. And I kind of grew up with that same feeling, and so I got the same feeling that my parents had. And so I resented my sisters. I looked at them and just saw them as something that I had to deal with, something like a problem, like their mental illness was causing my life to be harder than it needed to be, and I felt like I'm in therapy because of them. I'm just now really trying to broaden my mind and be able to look at them and see the person, because I used to see just the illness. My friends would be like, oh, which sister? I was like, the one that's bipolar, you know? And I didn't identify with them as like who they were. You know, mental illness and stigma, that it's always been around, but I'm really hoping that we can try to get it so it's not like that, so people don't think like I did or like my parents do. Seeing my sisters go through what they've been through, you know, being bipolar, ups and downs, and I want to be able to like be there for them and show them that, you know, nothing's wrong with them. And you don't know what it's like to be that. And so I think that's where the stigma comes from, is that it's scary to the people that don't know. Speaking from the outside, being able to look in and see what they're going through, see who they are as a person, not who they are in mental illness terms, is really important. I've had to take a step back and really realize that, you know, this mental illness that she has doesn't stop her from being my sister.
It started off early on in everybody, the closest ones to me, you know, it's like depression, anxiety, just a lot of body image issues, just anything on the spectrum, we have it. So it's been a battle. I think that's what people can really relate to. It doesn't stop. It's something you have to work through, but it's definitely possible to at least beat for a little while. I thought that people that had mental illness and asked for help didn't know how to fix their own problems. And it wasn't until I started to experience this generational thing that I realized it's something that you really do need to find help for. And I guess people in my family denial, you know, there's nothing wrong with me. No, there isn't something wrong with you. There's just something you need to overcome and you need help. The refusal to seek out that, you know, counseling or whatever it might be, just talking about it. You know, we're Latino, so we're very emotional, but when it comes to really digging deep into problems, we just shy away. When I started treatment, when I started going to counseling, it was very embarrassing. I didn't tell anybody. And it wasn't until I started getting into it and started figuring out what was really going on that I realized this is not something to be afraid of. It's something to push through. Like I had already mentioned, it's a battle. It's not something that you can just get over in a day, because it's not something that just happens in a day. It's something that if you're not born with, it's something that has arisen from an early age, something that's continual, that builds on itself. And I feel that it's really scary to start seeking help, seeking answers, and that was my problem. That was my thing. I wanted to know why I was feeling this way, why I couldn't sleep, why I wasn't, you know, feeling happy anymore, why I couldn't get out of bed, why my grades are suffering, why I couldn't connect to people, why I wanted to hurt myself, why all these things. And I was as scared of the answer as I was of the things I was doing. So what really pushed me into treatment was just seeing how it affected the people around me, you know, seeing my family suffer for my actions. You know, you inadvertently affect people around you whether or not you want to. So it's like mental illness or mental, you know, hindrances aren't an individual problem. It's a collective issue. So my experience with treatment was very, very positive. I kind of, you know, hit rock bottom, and my parents suggested, well, maybe you should go. And I didn't want to. I fought them on it, but then at the end of the day I was like, you know, I really do need to. So I did it. It was really like frustrating at first because they just pointed questions at me. What are you doing? Why do you feel this way? I don't know. Finally I did figure out why. And it's just been, you know, climbing that mountain, trying to get to the top and just look over, and just the progress you see is, I think, what makes taking that first step so worth it. starting at this dark place and getting to a place where you can appreciate yourself and appreciate others again or for the first time is just so rewarding. And even though it is scary, it's nerve-wracking, and you really don't want to be judged by other people. That shouldn't matter, even though it does. We're human, we want to be accepted. But I feel like, just, taking a deep breath and just going for it, because it's for you. And if you take care of you, you'll be able to take care of other people, which was really important to me.
I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder really when I was 19 years old. And it's one of those cases where it's been like re-diagnosed like probably 4 times. Doctors not knowing whether it was bipolar disorder type 1 or type 2 or bipolar disorder with psychotic features, and then deciding, oh, okay, it's schizoaffective disorder. The only reason why I'm bringing it up is because each time they do that, they medicate you differently. So I think it's common to always to feel like a guinea pig a lot of the time and to just be confused. So I was 19 years old and I was going to college at Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. And during the second semester, I started not sleeping very much. I started doing things like getting really, like I'm not a very religious person. All of a sudden I started having this urge to like write kind of like a mission statement letter of all these like religious ideas I had, and I was handing it out to teachers, to all my friends, to people on the street. Near the end of, like right before I got hospitalized, started having some like hallucinations that would happen. And that was just like flat out really scary. I'd just be talking to a friend and all of a sudden like it'd be like lightning was going through them or something. And I'd run away and be like, what? I'd be like, what are you doing? And everyone was like, I have no idea what's going on with Reggie. And then I was okay for like 7 years. So just recently I was out living in New York City and was doing just fine. I was probably working about like 4 jobs as a musician and had a coffee shop job and everything. So I mean, life was full of stuff to do all the time. Started having all these suicidal thoughts. And this was the first time for me that that's ever been a symptom, like a part of this. Like whenever I'd be alone in my apartment, let's say I was like cleaning and there'd be music playing, I would start to imagine that like the music that was playing was like at my funeral. Yeah, I remember there was one day like my roommate Amanda was gonna leave the house and like I didn't have anything lined up the rest of the day to do. And I remember thinking like I'm gonna kill myself. Like if she's gonna be gone and I'm here again, and those kinds of things start happening again where like I just start thinking about it. So I said, Amanda, let's get in a taxi and go to the hospital. Like it's that time. Okay, like nobody wants to go to the hospital, but you should go. I've never wanted to go. The first time I was made to go, I mean, it actually tricked me. They were like, we're going to go to the store. And then we ended up going to the hospital. I was like, what the hell is this? That was the only way I would go. So, like, and then after that, like, the next time I went on my own because I was like, this sucks. I don't want to deal with this. Can't. And then the last time I didn't want to kill myself. So I went then. The biggest thing, I guess, is just accepting it. And then it's a part of your life. But it's not forming your identity or anything. And
it's already common knowledge, but make it more of a common talking point, and not like we have to set time out of our day to do it, like a more natural occurrence. And if that happens, then more people will be willing to like come out and like say I'm depressed and this is what I've done so far and this is my options now, and as a like entire group or society, we would then be able to become more progressive in our actions in that moment.
Yeah, I just think overall it's really important to realize that there's nothing wrong with having depression. There's nothing wrong with getting help, taking medicine, doing whatever you need to do. And in fact, it's important and it should be done.
Especially for the students, it's important for them to know that they're not alone, that there's nothing wrong with them.
And that just trying to suck it up isn't the way to solve this problem, certainly not in the long run. And so that's why, I would hope that, people who are watching this, hi, if they are feeling that way, would talk to somebody, and to realize that it's not weakness, it's just like, any other condition. When I broke my arm, I had no problem with saying, okay, I'm going to have to take a couple of weeks off, I'm going to need to get some help. It can be a lot harder to admit when you need help for less visible issues, but you have to do it.
Don't be, embarrassed. That's the worst thing, because those people are trained to help you find you again, and it's just something so beautiful once you, come out on the other side. And it's not easy. You'll cry and you'll get mad and all this stuff, but once you're finished, or like I said, you're never really finished, but once you see that progress, once you've kind of come to a place where you can be okay, there's nothing better than that.